so this all started 4 years ago.
Right.
And at what place is the case now?
They non-suited the case. When they finally let James go home, they simply non-suited it. In other words, they withdrew their suit from the court. And in the court's mind, then the whole thing never happened. There was no apology. There was no, gee, we're sorry we turned your lives upside down. There was just, okay, you can have him back now, kind of an attitude that totally disregarded anyone's feelings.
Wow. So he is home with his parents.
Yes, he is home with his parents, and that was the happy ending. And when they finally decided to give him back, it was just suddenly as they took him away. And the day that the caseworker and I drove him back to his house, once James was in his mommy's arms, I said, well, what finally tipped the case in our favor? And she said, well, I read the file, and I saw there was nothing there, so we had a staffing, and I said, why are we still keeping this child?
Wow.
And they're trying not to drop my jaw, thinking to myself, read the file. Duh. Why does it take 13 people for one person to finally read the file, and realize that there's nothing there?
My goodness. So obviously you've done a lot of research. You've done, gone through all this yourself as a grandparent. What is really going on with CPS? Why is this incompetency? Were there 13 caseworkers? Is there such a huge turnover, or what is really going on?
It's a combination of factors, especially here in Harris County, Texas, which is the greater Houston area. Partly it's high turnover. Partly it's that they get these sweet young women who are full of enthusiasm. I have to give them that. They're right out of college. They have no experience being parents, let alone caseworkers, and then they jump on them huge numbers of cases that they need to sort through, and they are quickly overwhelmed, and I think a lot of them burn out within a few months, if not a few years. And so that high turnover rate contributed to part of the problem. And I think these people I think caseworkers are terribly underpaid, almost as badly as teachers. I think they get about the same salary as a teacher, but they don't get 10 weeks off in the summer.
Yeah.
Teachers, we at least, because I'm a retired teacher too, we at least get a little time to recharge before we have another onslaught of, 8 to 10 hour working days, So I think that's a part of the problem too.
Sure.
In the third section of the book, where I actually got a few caseworkers who would speak with me honestly, that was something that they brought out too, that and the fact that they have to drive their own cars around, that while they get a little bit of reimbursement for time and travel, it's not nearly expensive, so that they're coping with, paying gas and extra stuff out of their own pockets while their kids around, or taking a child to a doctor or dental appointment, and they're expected to do that a lot of times in their own vehicles. And I think all these things just really add up after a while, and they just drop out of the system.
Wow. So, Deborah, at any point, there's just a lot of stress that happens. You just can't believe that this is really happening. Did at any point you start doubting your daughter, or, looking for some maybe there was some underlying truth to this, maybe this child was abused? Did that ever cross your mind?
I never doubted my daughter. The one thing that did cross my mind was that my son-in-law's younger brother was living with them for a time, and he was getting ready to graduate with high school. Sometimes he was careless. I could see perhaps an accident might have happened, and maybe someone was swinging him around and clunk. That I could picture, but the thing was that my son-in-law's younger brother was never alone with him. But I really never doubted them at all. I knew my daughter too well. I knew my son-in-law too well to think that they would ever have done anything to him. I could see something accidental, but nothing more than that ever.
What kind of emotions did you go through yourself?
Oh,
all of them?
Anger, frustration, intense love. But the anger and the frustration would crop up the most in all of us, because I would think to myself, are these people idiots? Why can't they see? And coping with that for all of us was a major thing. Just the stress of why us, why me? Why does this keep going on? Why does it keep getting dragged? And that kind of stress really, it put a strain on their marriage. It put a strain on our marriage. It put a strain on everything that we did. And I think if we hadn't had great faith and wonderful support from my other daughters, from my brothers and sisters, from my parents, from family all around, from friends in our church, if we hadn't had the constant support of those people and all of their prayers for us, I think we might have fallen apart.
Yeah. I mean, this would be just so devastating. And, as I'm listening to you, I'm also reflecting back to my own child when he first had his first seizure. And, wow, I just can't imagine what you were going through, or I can only imagine. I just cannot, I haven't been there, and how do we know unless we've actually experienced this? So in your research, Deborah, obviously you have found out yet, and you had mentioned earlier that yours wasn't the only case. There are other cases that have, been treated like this.
Right, and a lot of times a friend of a friend would call me and say, oh, I know someone who went through this. And I would say, well, who is this person? Would you give me their phone number? And of course, sometimes people were reluctant to talk about it. And that's why in the second section of the book, a lot of the names are obviously not real, like Mr. QZ, Miss MX, things like that, because these people were fearful, what if my ex that accused me of this finds out that they're in this book, and God, then what will they do to me?
Yeah.
So I had to be very, very careful to protect people's identities, no matter what state they were in. But we'd talk to other people up at the courthouse. We'd run into people, on the beach down in Galveston, just having a fun day at the beach. And people would say, well, I heard about, this time when, and it would go on. And there were two extremes. Either the person knew about a child who was being abused and Child Protective Services left the child in the home, or it would be a false accusation like ours. So there's failure at both ends of the spectrum.
So is this all over with now?
Yes, it is all over with. Once they returned James to his home May of 2008, and then they had one more hearing in June of that year where the judge just said, congratulations, this is non-suited in 2 seconds, and they were done. But for James, it continued a while as he regained his trust.
Of course.
He was very shy with us. He didn't want to come into our house anymore. He was afraid he'd have to stay. And that lasted about another year.
Wow.
James's medication for the seizures has been excellent. He's played a lot of catch-up. Between the seizures and the trauma, he stopped talking altogether for a while. And then we had to go through a lot of speech and language therapy. He's been in, as a preschooler, he was in what's called the preschool program for children with disabilities. And last year, as a kindergartner, he was still pretty much behind and still in that special ed setting. So that this year now, he's old enough to be in first grade, but he's a very young sixth. And because he's still a little behind with speech and language, he's going to have a regular year of kindergarten with just pull out for speech therapy.
Oh, such a good
So
idea.
it's like, yeah, we've all